12 legends. 12 fortunes stolen not by fame, but by addiction. These weren't washed-up has-beens. They were some of the greatest voices in soul history. Behind the hits, drugs were quietly rewriting their contracts and their royalty checks. By the time they noticed, it was already gone. Let's count them down. Number 12. Chaka Khan. Chaka Khan's voice defined an era. I'm every woman, ain't nobody. A career built on raw vocal power most singers only dream of. But behind the scenes, cocaine addiction took hold during her most commercially explosive years, and it came at a cost few fans ever knew about. Deals were signed in haze, management decisions made without clarity, and portions of her earnings vanished into arrangements she barely remembers agreeing to. Khan has spoken candidly, in later interviews, about entire stretches of the 1980s. She can barely recall stretches where contracts were renegotiated, publishing shares shifted, and money moved in directions she didn't track. Unlike many on this list, Khan survived long enough to fight her way back, achieving sobriety and reclaiming both her career and her voice in the public eye. But even she has admitted the financial fog of those years cost her leverage she never fully recovered. Music industry writers have since pointed to that stretch of her catalog as a case study in how quickly control can slip away, even from an artist at the absolute height of her commercial power. The lesson in her story isn't death or ruin, it's how much even a survivor can lose before they notice it's gone. Khan rebuilt her name. She never fully rebuilt what those years quietly took. And her story is where this list begins, because if addiction could cost a legend as sharp and successful as Chaka Khan control over her own empire, imagine what it did to artists with far less power in the room. 11 more stories are coming, and they get darker from here. Number 11. Little Willie John. Before there was a Michael Jackson, there was Little Willie John, the original voice behind Fever, a song so powerful it made Peggy Lee a star long after John's own version had already broken hearts. But John's career was shadowed by heavy alcohol dependency almost from the start.
Up to the stage, proudly bring to the stage.
And it bled into every business decision around him. Reportedly, contracts were signed in states no artist should sign anything.
Since I was a kid.
Publishing terms accepted without negotiation. And by the time his commercial peak had passed,
The John family, Little Willie John's widow, Darlene.
John had little control left over the very songs that built his name. His personal life spiraled alongside it: legal trouble, a manslaughter conviction, and a prison sentence that ended his career entirely. He died in custody at just 30 years old.
A few years
A legend largely erased from mainstream memory, despite influencing generations of soul singers who came after him. His catalog, mismanaged and undervalued for decades, generated wealth for labels and publishers. Long after his death, wealth his own estate saw little of. Music historians have noted that John's case remains one of the clearest examples of how a young artist's dependency,
had strong genes, and he passed.
paired with an industry eager to exploit it, can permanently sever a legend from the fortune his own voice created. Willie John's story is a warning of how early addiction, paired with a young artist's total lack of leverage, can erase someone from history before the world even understood what they'd lost. He built the blueprint. Others got rich following it, and the next name on this list built her whole career fighting the same demon for over 3 decades.
Here's something most people don't realize. Only about 10% of you watching will hit subscribe. The other 90% just watch and move on. You made it this far, so you're clearly not most people. Hit subscribe. Back to the countdown.
Number 10. Esther Phillips. Esther Phillips had one of the most technically stunning voices in R&B history, a voice so respected that when she lost a Grammy to Aretha Franklin, Franklin herself handed her the trophy and said Phillips should have won. But behind that acclaim was a heroin addiction that stretched across 4 decades. One that repeatedly interrupted her career at the exact moments she was breaking through. Hit records were followed by disappearances. Comeback albums were followed by silence. Reportedly, entire periods of her career were spent cycling through rehabilitation facilities, while her catalog sat managed by others, generating royalties she wasn't always positioned to collect cleanly. Her 1972 Grammy-nominated song, Home Is Where the Hatred Is, was, chillingly, a first-hand account of addiction written for her by Gil Scott-Heron, an artist who would later live out a strikingly similar fate. Phillips kept performing, kept recording, kept proving her talent had never left her, but industry insiders have long noted that her business affairs during her addicted years were handled with far less care than her voice deserved, leaving royalty structures that shortchanged her for the rest of her life. Even her repeated comebacks, each one critically celebrated, weren't enough to fully reset the financial terms that had been locked in decades earlier during her worst years. She died in 1984, largely overlooked by the mainstream, despite influencing an entire generation of vocalists. And speaking of that song she sang about addiction, the man who wrote it was about to live out its warning himself. Number 9. Wilson Pickett. Wilson Pickett didn't just sing soul. He defined its rawest, most aggressive edge, Mustang Sally, In the Midnight Hour, Land of 1000 Dances, hits that built the sound of an entire genre. But by the 1980s, cocaine addiction had transformed Pickett's public image from soul icon to tabloid headline. Arrests piled up, legal fees piled up alongside them. And reportedly, in the scramble to keep his finances afloat during his most turbulent years, Pickett agreed to business arrangements around his older material that left him with far less control than an artist of his stature should have had. Industry accounts from the period describe a man whose once fierce negotiating instincts had been dulled by addiction, making him an easy target for advisors who didn't have his long-term interests at heart. His music never stopped being played. His songs remained radio staples for decades. But the income that should have followed that airplay didn't always find its way back to him in full. Pickett eventually got sober later in life, but by then, decades of unfavorable deals had already been locked in, leaving a gap between his cultural stature and his actual earnings that never fully closed. He passed away in 2006, remembered as one of soul's most electrifying performers, and quietly, as one of its most exploited. His story is a reminder that addiction doesn't just cost you your health. It costs you your ability to say no. And our next artist lost something even bigger, an entire empire he built with his own 2 hands. Number 8. Ike Turner. Ike Turner built an empire. As a band leader, producer, and businessman, he helped create Ike and Tina Turner's explosive sound and controlled nearly every dollar that came with it. But cocaine addiction reportedly consumed Turner throughout the 1970s, and as his using deepened, so did the chaos around his business affairs. Studios were mismanaged, contracts were signed under pressure, and by the time his marriage to Tina collapsed publicly in the early 1980s, so had much of the financial empire he'd spent 2 decades constructing. Reports from the period describe Turner losing control of his own recording studio, Bollock Sound, along with significant portions of his publishing and business interests' losses, tied directly to the financial instability his addiction created. Legal troubles compounded the damage, including a 1989 conviction that sent him to prison and further devastated whatever business standing he had left. Industry accounts describe those years as the point where Turner's business decisions, once famously shrewd, became erratic enough that longtime associates began pulling away from him entirely. Turner spent his final years attempting a public rehabilitation of both his image and his finances, achieving some of both before his death in 2007. But the empire he'd built in the 60s never fully returned to his control. Ike Turner didn't lose his royalties to a bad contract signed by someone else. He built the machine, and addiction handed him the wrench that took it apart from the inside. Our next artist's story reads almost identically, and it happened to a man who once wrote for the King of Pop's own record label. Number 7. Gil Scott-Heron. Gil Scott-Heron is often called the godfather of rap. A poet, songwriter, and soul jazz pioneer, whose track, The Revolution Will Not Be Televised, reshaped how black artists spoke about power in America. But by the 1990s, crack cocaine addiction had taken hold of Scott-Heron's life so completely that a 2010 New Yorker profile famously described him smoking in front of the reporter and falling asleep mid-interview. Prison stints followed, including time served for violating a plea deal tied to his addiction, and reportedly, his catalog and publishing were left largely unmanaged during these years. Generating income he had little ability to track or reclaim. Once one of the most prolific songwriters of his generation, Scott-Heron's output nearly stopped entirely during his worst years. And industry accounts describe a man whose business affairs were handled with far less structure than his talent demanded. His 2010 comeback album, I'm New Here, proved his gift had never disappeared, but it arrived after nearly 2 decades, where his name generated far more cultural cachet than actual income for the man himself. He died in 2011, hailed by everyone from Chuck D to Eminem as an irreplaceable influence. But the fortune his influence should have built never fully materialized in his own bank account. Scott-Heron warned America about self-destruction in his lyrics. He couldn't outright his own story. And our next artist's tragedy hits even closer to home, because it happened to a soul queen who never stopped selling records, even while addiction bled her dry. Number 6. Etta James. Etta James had one of the most powerful voices in American music. At Last alone secured her a permanent place in soul history. But for over 2 decades, heroin addiction shadowed nearly every stage of her career. And reportedly, it cost her far more than her health. Industry accounts from the 1960s and 70s describe James repeatedly agreeing to unfavorable recording and publishing terms during periods of active addiction, arrangements she later admitted she barely remembers negotiating. Arrests, stints in treatment, and a revolving door of managers left her business affairs in near constant disarray, even as her music continued generating steady income for labels and publishers. James herself has spoken candidly about the financial toll, describing periods where she was performing sold-out shows while barely seeing meaningful money from her own catalog. Biographers have pointed to this era as one of the starkest examples in soul music of an artist's commercial success and personal earnings moving in completely opposite directions. She achieved sobriety later in life and experienced a genuine career renaissance in the 80s and 90s. Finally regaining some of the control and recognition she'd been denied for decades. But by then, the damage to her long-term earnings from that lost era was largely permanent. Etta James proved a legend can survive addiction and still triumph.
You are mine.
What she couldn't undo was what those years had already taken from her bank account. Our next artist wasn't just underpaid. During his addiction reports say his songs were sold outright, for pennies, while he was still using. Number 5. Bobby Womack. Bobby Womack wrote songs for everyone. The Rolling Stones, Aretha Franklin, Wilson Pickett, before becoming a soul star in his own right. With hits like Across 110th Street. But heroin addiction gripped Womack for years, and reportedly, it directly shaped some of the worst business decisions of his career. Multiple accounts describe Womack signing away rights to songs for far less than their value during periods of active use, deals he later called some of the biggest regrets of his life. His publishing and songwriting credits were, by his own admission in later interviews, handled carelessly during these years, with royalty streams he should have controlled instead flowing to managers, labels, and middlemen who took advantage of his instability. Fellow musicians who worked with Womack during that period have since described watching him sign paperwork. He clearly didn't have the clarity to read, let alone negotiate. Womack got sober later in life and remained a working, respected artist until his death in 2014. Collaborating with everyone from Damon Albarn to Gorillaz in his final years. But the songs he wrote in his addicted years never fully returned to his control, and the royalties from some of his most enduring work continued flowing elsewhere long after he'd cleaned up. Bobby Womack's story is proof that even the men writing hits for legends could be robbed blind by their own addiction and by the people circling it. The next artist didn't just lose songs. Reports suggest he lost his entire recording catalog while addiction consumed the last years of his career. Number 4. Rick James. Rick James was funk royalty super freak. Alone generated enough revenue to fund a lifetime. But by the late 1980s, crack cocaine addiction had reportedly consumed nearly every part of James's life, and his once massive earnings collapsed alongside it. Court records and later interviews describe a period of total financial chaos, mounting legal fees from multiple arrests, mismanaged business affairs, and reportedly unfavorable arrangements around his publishing, signed during periods when James himself has admitted he wasn't in a state to negotiate anything. His 1991 conviction and subsequent prison sentence further devastated whatever leverage he had left in the industry, and years passed where James generated more tabloid headlines than income from his own catalog. He attempted a public comeback in the 2000s, regaining some cultural relevance through comedy sketches referencing his own chaotic history, even joking about the very addiction that had cost him so much. Those same interviews, though played for laughs, revealed just how much James himself understood about what those years had actually cost him financially. But behind the humor was a man who, by his own later admission, had signed away portions of his financial future during the darkest years of his addiction. James died in 2004, just as talks of a genuine musical comeback were gaining momentum. Super Freak still plays everywhere. The man who wrote it spent his final years fighting to reclaim what addiction had already given away. Our next story isn't about an artist losing control, it's about one being deliberately kept high, specifically so he would. Number 3. Sly Stone. Sly Stone didn't just lose his royalties to addiction, according to court documents. His royalties were reportedly taken from him by people using his addiction as a weapon. By the late 1980s, cocaine and sedative dependency had left Stone destitute and effectively a fugitive, with no record deal and no income. Court records from a later lawsuit allege that his own manager and an attorney supplied him with drugs on multiple occasions, then used his desperation to pressure him into signing away control of his business affairs entirely. According to the ruling, Stone was reportedly told there would be no more loans and no recording contract unless he agreed to hand his personal and financial affairs over to an entity controlled by the very people who'd been supplying him. He signed. For the next 2 decades, Stone lived in near obscurity and financial hardship, while his catalog songs like Everyday People and Family Affair continued generating significant revenue for everyone except him. It wasn't until 2015 that a Los Angeles jury awarded Stone $5 million, ruling that his former manager and associates had indeed cheated him out of decades of rightful royalties. The court literally validated what fans had feared for years, that Sly Stone's addiction hadn't just cost him money. It had been used against him, deliberately, by people he trusted, and it took him 30 years to get even a fraction of it back. Our final 2 stories involve fortunes even larger and losses even harder to watch. Number 2. Marvin Gaye. Marvin Gaye gave the world What's Going On
of people to the toxic metal.
and Let's Get It On albums considered among the greatest ever recorded. But by the late 1970s,
This deadly mass shooting.
a worsening cocaine addiction was colliding with a mountain of tax debt that had reportedly reached over $4 million owed to the IRS.
In a white t-shirt.
There's far too many of
Facing bankruptcy and the threat of imprisonment for unpaid taxes, Gaye made a decision that would shape the rest of his financial life.
It follows a water crisis in Flint that began.
He sold the majority of his music royalty rights to Motown, retaining only his publishing, in a desperate move to address debts that his escalating drug habit had only made worse.
14 million more Americans would be uninsured.
His addiction reportedly continued deepening through the early 1980s, forcing him to give up multiple homes
Drawing water from the Flint River.
and eventually flee the country entirely, relocating to Belgium, partly to escape his financial collapse. Even his brief career resurgence with Sexual Healing in 1982 couldn't undo the royalty structure he'd already signed away. When Gaye died in 1984, his estate was reportedly $9 million in debt, and for years afterward, the IRS seized nearly all the royalty income his catalog generated. Income that, had his addiction and financial spiral never collided the way they did, might have gone directly to his own children instead. Marvin Gaye's music became a permanent part of American culture. The money it generated took years to find its way back to his family. And our final story is arguably the saddest of all 12. A voice as important as Motown's biggest stars, who died with almost nothing to his name. Number 1. David Ruffin. David Ruffin's voice was the sound of My Girl, one of the most recognized vocal performances in American music history. As the lead voice of The Temptations, before going solo, Ruffin should have secured a fortune that lasted generations. Instead, a cocaine addiction that reportedly began in the 1960s and never released its grip followed him for the rest of his life, quietly dismantling his finances at every turn. Industry accounts describe Ruffin repeatedly missing performances, mismanaging his solo royalties, and entering business arrangements during active addiction that left him with far less control over his own catalog than an artist of his stature should have had. Legal troubles and tax debt piled up alongside the addiction, and by the 1980s, a man whose voice had defined an era of American music was reportedly struggling with basic financial stability. In June 1991, Ruffin died of a cocaine overdose in Philadelphia. Found without identification, his death unconfirmed for hours because no one at the hospital realized who he was. Reports at the time noted he'd been carrying only a small amount of cash, despite decades of hit records still generating airplay revenue somewhere in the industry. The man who sang "I've Got Sunshine on a Cloudy Day" spent his final years in financial freefall, disconnected from the wealth his own voice had built. 12 legends, 12 fortunes eroded by addiction, mismanagement, and an industry that rarely protected the artists who made it rich. Their songs are immortal. Their stories are a warning most of the industry still hasn't learned from.